Welcome to Recovering My Balance, a podcast about recovery from mental ill health. Join your host Candice on a journey of recovery from trauma and the lessons learned along the way.
Hi everyone, my name is Candice and I will be your host for today's episode. In episode 3, we talk about the story part of the SAAD process. Knowing your values and boundaries is an essential part of the recovery process. So what are your values? What an interesting question. I'm going to read another diary entry. This was on the 21st of March, 2023. Did a shite job yesterday. How could you fuck up so much? You should have been better. You should have timed it better. You should have worked through lunch. Why are you so useless? I can't get anything right. People will think you are stupid. They're watching you. How could you do such a terrible job? You should have registered them earlier. My hand hurts. I'm so tired. I just want to stay at home. Repeating noise. Heart dropped. Anxious. Scared. Vertigo. Dizzy. Pain. Pretty nasty things that I was saying to myself. Quite sad, really, but it's the way I felt. I can't knock that. I really had to sit down and think about values. Now, this is something that people automatically assume that we know. But in actual fact, when you are a traumatized person, you lose yourself in trying to survive. And you get to a point where you are so warped that you cannot tell the difference between yourself and others. You don't know who you are. I was then, in essence, betraying myself. And when you're constantly betraying yourself and your values, those core beliefs that you have as a person, then it's easy to learn to hate yourself. And also, you don't trust yourself. And so when I realized that, when I really sat down and thought about what my values were, I came to the conclusion that values that I was doing or believing in weren't the values that were at the core of who I am as a person and what I wanted to achieve in my life moving forward. It's very difficult for somebody who has no self, no concept of them, their core self, to then sit and say, okay, well, what are my values? That's a really difficult thing to do because you don't know who you are. Think of it in a different way. So how I did it was, firstly, I learned about values. I learned what are values. And then I researched each value. So for instance, if you had a value that's called authenticity, then I researched, okay, so what is authenticity? What does it mean? How do I interpret authenticity? Okay, and I came up with around a list of about 30 different values. Now, obviously, I can't live by 30 different values. That's just ridiculous. As I started to group them off into clusters, I then went and said, okay, so which 3 out of those clusters is more a representation of who I want to be in the future? So I didn't know who I was as a person because I'd been such a chameleon my whole life for survival's sake, which was important because it helped me survive, but is not helpful to me now as an adult, wanting to find a reason to live, basically. Find happiness. And the true key to happiness for me was to find out who I was as a person and to honor that. And in order to do that, you need to really think about values because that is the core of who you are, the building blocks. And unless you have the building blocks, you can't then do the other things that go on top of those building blocks because you've got no foundation. If you don't have a foundation, your building will collapse. where do I want to be? Who do I want to be in the future? That's about you as an individual. It's not about where do I want to be with my job. When I die, what regrets do I not want? That then helped me look at the values from an outside viewpoint. And I picked 3 clusters which I felt were who I wanted to be, not who other people wanted to be or told me to be. I chose authenticity. Then I chose curiosity, because I am a very curious person. It brings me joy. It brings me happiness, being curious about things. And then my third value was empathy. Empathy is a very important part of who I am as a person. And yes, that helped in the trauma response to hide who I was as a person. It's a very valuable skill to have. If used in the right way, my empathy could be really, really wonderful. So you might have done all this work to choose these values, but then you need to actually try them out. See what they are when you practically apply them in your life. Do they work? And so what I did was I wrote out my value statements and I took a photo of it and I had it on my phone. Every morning, I would read my 3 values and their statements. Then I would try to the best of my ability to apply those values during the day. I did this every day, like clockwork. I built this as like a habit. And the idea is to really instill it in your brain, teach your brain, this is my new way that I'm moving forward. These are the values that I want to be following. First, it will be really hard to apply your values because alien to you, they're not a habit, whereas the old values that you followed, even though they weren't your own, were a habit. And you might find that one of the values is not sitting quite right with you. And then you might be like, well, actually, I think I want to change this one and I want to try this one out and see how that works. And then eventually you'll come up with the 3 that you really like. It's also really good to taste these values with other people. I spoke to the people closest to me, my brother and my best friends and my dad, and then I read them my values and asked them if they thought that those were authentically me. Sometimes what happens is your values might be very different from what they perceived your values to be. They might not like that. They might think, what the hell's going on here? You're suddenly a completely different person. No, I'm not a completely different person. This is actually who I am. I was just pretending to be this other person because I needed to survive. And it worked when I was a kid and it kept me safe. But now it's not working for me. I've already done a lot of research on values. I have decided that these are the values that I think are authentically me. Okay. And again, like I said, it's got to be a habitual act. So you have to do it every day. You read your values, you try and follow them. You will not get it right most days, but there will be some days where you do get it right. And then the more you do it, the better you get at it. You'll start to feel really empowered because you are following the values that you have decided for yourself are who you are as a person. So you're no longer betraying yourself. You're actually trying to support yourself. And then once you've got your values, you then need to work out boundaries around those values. So you need the values and you need to understand the values and have tested the values out in order to understand what boundaries you need to put around. It's like, okay, so I have these values. What are my limits with regards to people testing my values? I'm doing this podcast. I'm telling the world about the fact that I have PTSD and I'm getting tested for ADHD. Now, with that comes a lot of issues. What if people try and dissuade me from being authentically myself? What am I going to do in that situation? How far am I going to let them push before I push back? So, for instance, your family member or friend might say, I don't think this is a good idea. If people saw this, then they might use it against you and you might not be able to get a job. Then I would say, okay, I value your opinion. Thank you for sharing that with me. However, I have decided to do this because I've decided I want to be authentic. and I want to help and support others through the recovery process. And yes, I have thought about the fact that people might be discriminatory against me as a result. I am choosing to do what I'm doing, and I need you to respect that. It's not what you want for me. I know that you're caring for me and you just want to protect me, but this is the decision I've made and I want you to respect that. People think boundaries are like, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. No, boundaries are expressing what you'd want to do and why, and other people honoring that and actually listening to you and going, okay, so I might not agree with what you've decided to do, but I understand that you've really thought about this and this is something important to you. You want to do this, and so I'm going to support you in it. There is nothing more empowering than that for you as a person, but also for that person, because they're seeing you hold a boundary. They're seeing you go, no, these are my values and this is what I'm going to stick by and these are the reasons why. And so they start to learn to respect you more as an individual. And they might even learn new things about you that they didn't know before because of your chameleon trauma response, which then also helps them to support you. You need to educate people around you about your new values and boundaries. They'll push against your boundaries quite hard because they're not used to you having those boundaries. You have to hold firm, because if you give in, then they won't respect the boundaries. People aren't respecting it if they're just constantly trying to hammer it down and get you to be back to the way that you were, then those are people you don't want in your life, because they don't care about you as a person. They just care about what they can get out of the relationship. There is a limit to which you let people push those boundaries before you go, okay, right, no, I don't want you in my life. I have warned you several times, you just keep breaking these boundaries. You clearly do not care about me as a person or my needs. I am not going to spend my energy with someone like you, where I can spend energy with the people who actually respect those boundaries and respect me as a person. And that's as it freed me up to be able to spend more time with people I really care about and who care about me. I really wanted to think about my values because I knew that these are my foundations. They are probably the most important thing that I'm going to do in this whole recovery process. I'm really happy that I did it. It has completely changed my life in a good way. It's really important, but it's really hard to understand yourself when you are a traumatized person. Once you've done that process and you've built your foundations, you can then work on the other things, because a house is only as good as its foundations. And if the foundations are weak or there are no foundations, that building is going to collapse. It might not collapse straight away, but it will eventually collapse. And then all that hard work to build that building all gets undone. So important to really spend time building those foundations and make sure they're really strong. They are sturdy. They are going to withstand earthquakes, tornadoes. They're going to withstand everything. Yeah, no matter how bad the situation gets for you, you will know who you are as a person. You will know your values. If you are really committed to those values, to really create that firm foundation, then everything you build up from that foundation is more likely to be stable and stay in place. Yes, sometimes houses get old and some bricks fall down, or the roof gets a hole in it, or starts leaking, or plumbing gets old. There will be things that need to be fixed and repaired, but the main part of the house is sturdy. So instead of having to try and rebuild a whole house, you only need to fix those little problems along the way. Well, anyway, I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening. Please follow us on social media, visit our website, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. We hope you will join us for the next episode of Recovering My Balance.